Okay, good morning everyone. I promised you on Wednesday, Owen, I was going to read you a classic. Well, here it is. It is The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. And I'm sure some of your mums and dads have probably heard this story, and I remember it being read to me when I was at primary school. But it's a fabulous wee story, so I hope you enjoy it. This will be the last one we do because it's going to be a fairly busy week for me next week, getting everything all sorted and setting up the site. Given that there's likely to be a change. We don't know exactly what that change is going to be, but there is likely to be a change. So that means that we're going to have to set up the site. And there'll be some small disruptions over the week for those of us who are here. So we'll give you more information about that on Monday. Awesome. Righto, let's get into the story. Rightio, The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch by Rhonda and David Armitage. Now, I think this book was first published in 1977. So that gives you a bit of an idea of how old it is. All right, and I think you might be getting a little bit of a clue as to what this story might be about, looking at the cover. I wonder what's in that basket, given the title of the story, The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. And then as we go through, you might see some more clues. And what you probably also might know is that there's not too many lighthouses now that have keepers. I think most lighthouses that are around nowadays are unmanned. They're all run by computers. And the other thing, of course, is there's GPS technology around now too. So some places there's no need for lighthouses. All right, but maybe that's something you could look for. Research a bit about what lighthouses are and what they do. All right, once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Grinling. At night time, he lived in a small white cottage perched high on the cliffs. In the daytime, he rowed out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. Why do you think he needs to clean and polish the light? What do you think he needs to do that for? Mr. Grinling was a most industrious lighthouse keeper. Now, you might not know what industrious means, but it means he works hard and gets busy and gets things done. Come rain or shine, he tended his light. Look at that, there's a little bit of rain and shine on both sides of that, each side of that page. Sometimes at night, the light's not so good there. Let's see if we can shift it around a bit. Oh, it's even worse there. Let's move it over to here. Oh, a little bit better. No, still not that good. Maybe right in the corner, a little better. Yeah, that's better. All right, sometimes at night, Mr. Grinling lay sleeping in his warm bed. The ships would toot to tell him that his light was shining brightly and clearly out to sea. Each morning, while Mr. Grinling polished the light, Mrs. Grinling worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting a delicious lunch for him. What a lovely lady. Look at that. Wonder what she's got planned for his lunch on this day. Once she had prepared the lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it onto the wire that ran from the little white cottage to the lighthouse on the rocks. Now, given the title and what we saw earlier, I wonder if you can spot a problem. But one day, something terrible happened. Mrs. Grinling had prepared a particularly appetizing lunch. She made a mixed seafood salad, a lighthouse sandwich, cold chicken, whatever that word is. I'm not sure what that word is. Maybe you could help me out there. Sausages and crisps, peach surprise, iced sea biscuits, drinks and assorted fruit. She put the lunch in the basket, as usual, and sent it down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. I wonder if you know what devoured means. Maybe you could use the clues in the rest of the text there to figure out what devoured means. Clear off, you varmints, shouted Mr. Grinling, but the seagulls took not the slightest notice. This is an excellent peach surprise, boys. She's a great cook, Fred. Scrumptious lunch, Tom. Yes, those seagulls certainly look like they're enjoying themselves. Doesn't look like Mr. Grinling is. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. Tomorrow I shall tie a napkin to the basket, said Mrs. Grinling. Of course, my dear, agreed Mr. Grinling. A sound plan. Uh-oh. They'll have to try harder than that to stop us, Bert. Oh, those seagulls. On Tuesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains for another plan. They're a brazen lot, those seagulls, said Mr. Grinling. Brazen indeed, said Mrs. Oh, I've got that wrong. I'll try that out. They're a brazen lot, those seagulls, said Mrs. Grinling. Brazen indeed, said Mr. Grinling. What shall we do? Our cat does not appear to like seagulls, said Mrs. Grinling. No, my dear, said Mr. Grinling. Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser. Of course, exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch. A most ingenious plan, agreed Mr. Grinling. Hamish did not think that this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and hissed at Mrs. Grinling, securing him in the basket. There, Hamish, said Mrs. Grinling, consolingly. Consolingly, there's another good word. I wonder if you can use that. Or if you use the clues in the rest of the text to figure that out. There, Hamish, said Mrs. Grinling, consolingly. If someone's saying there to you, I wonder how they're speaking to you. I have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home. Poor old Hamish. Look at that, he's even got his name on the basket. Sadly, Flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed, his whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. Oh dear. Pretty kitty, like a piece of lobster, Mornay? This food gets better every day, Fred. Aren't you going to chase us, kitty? Cheeky seagulls. Lackaday, lackaday, said Mr. Grinling sadly. Meow, meow, agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for a new plan. What shall we do? Said Mr. Grinling. What shall we do? Said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. I have it, she exclaimed. Just the mixture for hungry seagulls. Indeed, my dear, said Mr. Grinling. What have you in mind? Wait and see, said Mrs. Grinling. Just wait and see. Mustard sandwiches, chuckled Mr. Grinling. A truly superb plan, my dear, truly superb. I wonder if it's going to work. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them off down the wire to the expectant seagulls. Yuck! Ugh! Ah! I don't think they like it. On Friday, Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. All right, boys, let's go and have lunch elsewhere. It's the same as yesterday's lunch, Fred. Ooh, that's a good way to solve the problem, isn't it? So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, a jubilant Mrs. Grinling put away the mustard pot before she prepared a scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. While he waited for his lunch down at the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through his telescope. Oh, I wonder if you guys know any sea shanties. And this is what he saw. Uh-oh. No mustard in this lot, Tom. We'll fly back here for lunch again tomorrow, boys. This is a delicious chocolate eclair, Fred. Oh, the poor old fisherman. He's going to miss out on his lunch. Oh, dear. Ah, well, such is life, mused Mr. Grinling as he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. Right, I hope you enjoyed that, the Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch. Classic wee story. It's a story about solving a problem, really, isn't it? The big story in the end was about how do we solve this problem? And Mr. and Mrs. Grinling, well, Mrs. Grinling in particular, didn't she? She came up with an ingenious idea to solve that problem of the seagulls pinching the lunch. And I wonder if you can think about other ingenious ideas to solve little problems. And maybe that's something that'd be good for some of your story writing when you come back to school, as you look at a problem and you look at how the problem's solved in your story. Okay, so the wee activity today, if you choose to do it, is I know there's some pretty wrung out mums and dads and principals around. So if you are keen and if you are able to, I want you to talk to mum and dad about what they would like for lunch. And I would like you to find an ingenious way of delivering it to them. Okay, now they'll probably be, well, it might be even dinner, actually, would be a good idea. So they may be at home or they may be at work. Now, if they're at work, you're going to have to think very ingeniously. All right, but I want you to think about how you could deliver the lunch. And if you can do it after you've done that thinking, maybe you do try it. You're going to need to talk to mum and dad to see if it can be done first, but maybe you try delivering the lunch, see how it goes. All right, have lots of fun. That's the end of the stories for now. What we will do from next week is, obviously there's lots of things going on, but we will probably stop the online learning as it's currently happening next week at some stage, so we can prepare ourselves to get everything ready to go back on the school site. Awesome. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and we look forward to catching up with lots and lots of people in the next fortnight. All right, see you. Bye.